Hello, everyone. Welcome to our recurring webinar here. Thanks for joining. Shafi is on stage with me. He's going to be the person presenting the topics today on contract management. As for the people who are recurring guests, we will take a quick break for about a minute or two, and then come back on just so let people join who have registered and have not joined yet, maybe give them a few more minutes. So we'll be back. Stay tuned. Welcome again. For those who joined while we're just waiting for a few minutes. Welcome to our webinar series. On stage with me is Shafi. He's going to be presenting the topic today. I'll give you a little bit of a background as what we usually do. So if you've been with us over the last few webinars, bear with me for 1 minute. I'm just going to walk through it quickly. We've been offering these webinars periodically on topics which are selected to help build awareness of improvement methodologies and tools that we used in past. Today's topic, as I said earlier, is on contract management. It's part of the supply management series. Our last webinar was the introduction to the overall umbrella. And what we're planning to do is walk through a few of those topics as were selected in a poll by the people who attended the last webinar. So Shafi, he's our expert supply chain leader with extensive experience in areas of cost and risk reduction within the supply chain process. He has led and supported projects with multi-million-dollar savings. He's also been recently awarded a master's certificate in supply chain and logistics management from Schulich School of Business. On today's topic, he successfully executed and implemented contract management within global footprint organizations. Before I hand over the stage to him, a little bit on the structure of our talk. We will start with a presentation on topic. It's a video presentation. While the presentation is occurring, you can ask any questions that you may have in the questions tab on the right side of your screen. Shafi will keep an eye on the questions during the presentation and will then answer them at the end. We also usually have an opportunity to talk face-to-face and discuss any further questions or interesting topics through a Google Meet session, more to have a social side of this webinar. A link has been put in the chat window. And I will also refresh that link at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Shafi, and we'll join after the presentation. Shafi?
Sure. Thank you, Asim, for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's been one hell of a year. We've been ready to say goodbye to 2020 since March. Now we're finally here in December. And part of the activities for December as we go through is what do we want to do next year as part of our business. One of the topics that was selected during the last supply chain series as a follow-up that received overwhelming, response was contract management. So we put together a bit of a presentation on contract management, which is highlight some of the tasks that we should be doing or we should try incorporating within our contract management process. This is whether you're a contract manager yourself or as part of your procurement or buying role, you manage contracts or other roles you manage contracts. So Asim introduced me to the as a supply chain former leader in my older organization and joining Analyze and Improve as a specialist here. And I've designed contract management workflows as part of my previous role, just so that we could have a smoother transition. When you do a good procurement process, the outcome to make sure that you're actually getting the savings or you're getting the service, the implementation is the where you succeed or fail. And contract management is key to having that kind of success and reducing that baseline and costs and implementing all the wonderful things that you do during the procurement process. So without further ado, let's watch the webinar. I'll look out for your questions. This topic really excites me. I'll be happy to answer anything that you have, any questions. And then if you would like to join the Google Meet after, happy to speak to you informally there as well. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to a webinar on contract management. I'm your host, Shafi Jatori, and I will go through this presentation with you. So let's get started. The agenda for today's conversation is defining contract management. When does the process actually begin? Understanding your contract, aligning expectations between the parties, routine management, some aspects of that, keys to success, how to deal with conflict management, and then finally feedback to stakeholders. So defining contract management, the aim is to fulfill requirements as laid out within the contract, exchange for compensation related to those services. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do is, you went through the hard work of developing a scope of work, you went through your procurement process, and then you got to the end and you awarded a contract for services. And now it's time to manage that contract to ensure that the services that you did go out for an award are actually completed as per your expectations. And this is where essentially this function comes in and where this function, the role of this function. So if you go to where does this process actually begin, so let's go through this. You did the demand plan, you did the procurement process, you did the contract award. Now, the process begins once a contract has been signed. Now, in most cases, this is often true because we wouldn't want third parties coming on site without ensuring that they have insurance certificates, they have all liabilities are covered, they have our site-specific training. There's a whole host of requirements that need to happen once a contract has been signed. Often cases, contract award is different from a signature. In some organizations, this is the case, so you need to make sure that it is signed. And a signature also validates that they agree with everything that you've put forward to them in terms of the terms of the contract, the rates of the contract, the requirements on reporting, requirements on performance. If you have pain and gains, they've agreed to everything as per the contract. So they're now on the hook to meeting that, delivering the service to you. Contract management best practices include a kickoff meeting first internally. So once a contract is signed, you would like a procurement team, whoever awarded that contract, to sit down and go through the contract with the contract management officer if it is different from the procurement analyst and the operations as well. If you do that internally first, you have a good understanding of what's been signed, and then you include the supplier in, because they'll be the one performing the service. It is important that every party is aligned on what we expect them to do, and what we really expect them to do, what our expectations are. That's period. And the second best practice would be establishing routines up front. So a small comment at the bottom: contract closeout is an important function of contract management, and contract closeout is simply, you have delivered all the services, I've checked off, and I agree that all the services are up to my expectation. There is nothing outstanding with regards to this contract, and I have also paid all my dues associated with this contract. So there is no recourse that 3 months later, 4 months later, you come back and state that I owe you money or funds because X, Y, and Z was missed. This contract closeout procedure document that is signed and dated ensures there is nothing after the fact. So first step you go through is understanding your contract, right? So at this point, what you'd want to do as a contract management officer is look at the contract and say, what is the deliverable as per the scope of work? If you haven't looked at it before, okay, so what are they doing? What is this contract as third party doing for me? Who's responsible for the final checkoff? Is it somebody from my organization or somebody from their organization who signs off that the work completed is as per expectation and as per the quality we require? What are the service level agreements? How will the invoicing occur? Is it monthly, weekly, daily? Who authorizes discovery work? So work that isn't anticipated within the scope of work, but could happen as a result of doing this job. So how does that procedure also work? The attention thing at the bottom is simply, once a contract has been signed, it's unlikely to be changed unless there's major considerations that were missed. And a contract cannot accommodate every scenario. The more you de-risk a contract, the more expensive it becomes, because the risk doesn't generally go away. It transfers between one party or the next party. And the more you take it off you and put it on somebody else, there's a value associated with that. So a few points, I just wrote down a few points when you're reading your contract: the head of agreement, the order of precedence, the liability indemnity, the warranties, the suspensions, the terminations, the contract rates. All of these are important, and all of these need to be reviewed and understood, and how and what the terms actually state. At this point, you wouldn't necessarily go through role playing on what happens in the event. How would you enforce suspension, or how would you enforce termination? But it is good to understand what clauses do exist. It's more important to understand what is to be delivered, because at the start of a relationship, there's a lot of positivity, there's a lot of momentum. There's good vibes going on, so you want to be able to take advantage of that. Aligning expectations is part of those excitement up front. You define roles and responsibilities. You develop a RACI matrix. You include all functional areas that are going to be involved. So if inventory, warehouse, logistics, anybody's going to be involved, you put them in, and you include people's names under the tasks, or whatever the left column you would want to call it. You'd want people's names in there. You do not want job titles in there, and you certainly don't want functional area titles in there. The point of this RACI is to hold people accountable for the task that they're responsible for, and for the overall everybody involved to understand who's doing what. So the names are absolutely critical. As a contract management officer, if you're separate from procurement, you need to understand that you don't own the contract, you run the contract. That means the ownership of making sure that all the paperwork and everything is done and dusted belongs somewhere else. So you have to understand the contract, but any issues that are beyond your scope need to be escalated, so that your focus is making sure the contract is running as per the contract was meant to run. Also understanding the contract in terms of aligning expectations, minimum criteria, invoicing methodology, ad hoc tasks, and amendments. That's also part of this. Carries on from understanding your contract. Document control, important to establish who maintains this key piece, who maintains the versions, who's going to update the documents, who's going to update the charts, what kind of documentation is required, who has access to it, and how do you secure that access. Lifecycle alerts, as in we're going above budget. You get an error or a pop-up associated with that. You would get the contract is about to expire, and then that gives a trigger on whether do we want to extend it, do we want to what are we saying? Is the job done and the contract expiring, or what action do we need to take? And then also a life cycle alert would be that the performance isn't being met. Your timelines are going out. That's also an alert that you want. Compliance control is ensuring that everything you do is auditable and documented. So in the event you need to go back to your records, everything is in order. These are critical pieces of the contract management phase here. And then going forward, you start establishing routine management. It's important to establish hierarchy in terms of how does the organization function, and then establishing routine management. So a little graphic on the right, daily task list. I have the morning huddle at 9. The supplier, you need to be there at 9 on time, and with everybody that's going to be required to do the job on site that day. We're going to have another review session at 1 p.m. and end of the day review at 5 p.m. This could be anything you want. It could be as detailed as you want, as infrequent as you would, as required to maintain performance of the contract. And then financials, pro forma invoice submissions due on X date or X time of the month. Budget adherence report due weekly. For capital project, you want to be able to keep on track with everything that's happening. Monthly performance meeting. This is how we did last month. This is what we anticipated to do the following month. And are we geared? Do we have the people ready? Do we have everybody trained? Do we have all the accesses? Everybody is on site, and this to meet that need. And then escalation criteria is extremely important. You document the claim and send it to the contract management officer, but it's all about how are we going to deal with disagreements. The number of days is relevant. You don't want them too long, but it's also not a hard stop. If you're getting good communication, if there's good traction, then oftentimes it doesn't get escalated within those days. But you also want to be able to give a mechanism to both parties to get resolution quickly. You do not want a specific issue continuing on for weeks. You'd want evaluation and then a resolution to that. And if that's above your level, then you ask for help and guidance, because that's what the hierarchy is there for. In majority of the cases, the suppliers are willing to conform to company norms, except when those norms affect compensation outside of the scope of the contract. So putting invoices on hold because they didn't do anything, they didn't do something that was not anticipated when the contract was drafted, does cause issues, causes strain on relationships. The supplier wants to be there to do the work. They understand that if they do a good job, they have a better chance of getting the next contract. So they're invested, and we are invested that we want to make sure that the job is done right, because it is my job, it's my company, it affects my financials, goals, and my production targets. So everybody's invested. However, once we start doing things outside of what is accepted in the contract or stated in the contract, we enter a zone where delays happen, conflicts arise, there is tension within parties, and that is detrimental to the overall relationship. We move to the keys to success. It is important to set up an evaluation step and management, routine management. So you start off with invoicing audits as well. You determine an audit structure that you will invoice every fourth, that you'll audit every seventh invoice, for example, and then you'll match it against the rates. And if you come across any discrepancy, then that would be cause for concern, and you can go back and say, okay, I'm going to pick up the last 10 and see how it works. Budget adherence, if it's you've assigned capital dollars, operational dollars, you need to stay within that budget. You need to make sure that money is being spent in the right areas. The people that are working on site are acting safely. They aren't putting themselves or somebody else at risk. This is extremely important. And then performance is, how are they actually performing? This includes behavior as well, right? So it's like they're doing the job great, but they're hard to speak to, they're hard to communicate to, they do not acknowledge when we are sending them directions or instructions. It becomes, that also is a bit of an issue that we would deal with. That is also falls under the performance aspect of contract management. So that is a key. These keys are non-exhaustive. You could develop them and you can add as many important aspects to routine management as you would like, but it's important to establish this up front. Conflict management. Every relationship has conflicts, but how we deal with them determines the success. Establishing a framework at the beginning, which is the escalation criteria, if I may add, helps with ensuring that conflicts are resolved amicably and with the satisfaction of all parties. Excuse me. Collaboration, as per the chart, collaborating is a win-win solution where there's a unanimous understanding of the problem, and then both parties work to resolve it to everybody's satisfaction. That is generally how people would want relationships to work. Sometimes it doesn't. Compromising is, we understand that we didn't have 100% of the fault here, but we're looking forward to getting resolution quickly and then moving on and taking the quick steps. Where compromising usually involves expedition, moving forward, moving quickly. Accommodating is where you don't want to be, and competing is sometimes the right way, but it also does affect the relationship. Accommodating a lot more so, because you cave, you don't challenge the viewpoint put in front of you, and essentially it is a green light to saying, yes, okay, fine, it was my fault, even though you don't completely agree with that assessment. And competing is, you need to win. That's the message there is, I have the power in the relationship, I need to win, and you need to accept that I am correct. At times, if you're within your scope of the contract, you need to be able to enforce that as well, but enforce it in a way the relationship can continue. And avoiding is something that you wouldn't want to do. If one party brings up an issue and the second party avoids it, that's going to affect the relationship in a detrimental manner. So conflict management is a key piece of contract management, and it is a continuous effort to keep the relationship going. Feedback to stakeholders is by far, I would say, one of the most important steps within the contract management phase. This is about responding back to how was the contract executed, what was the contract missing in terms of, this is through the life of the agreement, this is what we learned about, these are the legal clauses that we needed, these are the commercial clauses that we needed, this is the items and the scope of work that we're missing. And more importantly, if you have a QBR routine already in place, the feedback becomes much easier, because at the end of the QBR, if it's a 2-year agreement, your 8th report would give a summary of your full previous 7 and the last quarter. And oftentimes this gives a template to whoever is approving contracts. Say, if you're not the procurement person, the procurement team will take a look at this and understand, do I invite them again? Do I invite the supplier again? Do I invite, how do I make my contract better? Were most of the problems in the contract our problem, or was it their problem? How do we understand how to make our life better going forward? And suppliers are very well invested in having QBRs, because it affects them in terms of being invited or rejected for future contracts. Nobody wants to come in for just one job. Everybody would like the relationship to continue and to prosper together. And the graphic on the right, budget adherence, on-time performance, number of claims. These are multiple. This is non-exhaustive. You can have many other KPIs in here related to under each subheading there to give you a very detailed QBR report. That can be a feedback report as well. So this is a critical piece of the contract management function. And this does bring us to the end of the presentation. I hope you learned something. I hope you have you derived value out of this discussion. I'm looking forward to the questions, and have a wonderful day.
Okay, that was a good presentation, Shafi. For the people, please ask your questions, whatever you have, through the question tab. I'll get a few of them started, Shafi. One of the questions I think I can also relate with is, if you had one thing out of everything you just presented in the contract management, which is required for it to work properly and deliver efficiently, what would you pick that must be done, regardless of if it's a goods or supply contract?
In my opinion, it's the routine management. It's the day-to-day functioning of that contract, which it causes the largest amount of grief, because it's constant face time, right? If things aren't going well, if routines aren't established, if you don't have the right expectations up front and through the life of the contract, the conflict management, you're always either in the avoiding side or you're never in the compromising, because nobody wants to accept any portion of the responsibility or saying that maybe I had an issue with this. So routine management is key to ensuring that you get the value, right? When you do the procurement, you've invested significant resources, time, money to make sure that you get the best value, the best contract that you can possibly get in the market. And now it's time to get that job done. The job that adds revenue, the job that adds production, the job that adds, the life of your organization. So I think that would be my place to start.
Okay. Thanks, Shafi. There's a question here: in this insurance coverage requirement, a hard or soft metric? So in other words, is it simply yes, no, they meet that requirement, or do you show some flex depending on other factors? So just to elaborate, I think if I understand it correctly, is there are multiple things you must have, so many different kind of coverages, liability, errors, emissions, whatever it might be. But there are also limits on how much you need to have, like 5 million and some, 2 million and some. Is this a yes, no in that sense? Is you must meet every worded thing, or is there a play like can they go from 5 to 3 to 2 as a coverage? Like if they have coverage but they have not as much coverage.
I think that goes straight to risk on the contract, so the risk on the job. If you have services, if you have boots on the ground, you need to have the adequate amount of dollars there. If you're moving precious cargo, if you're part of the logistics and you just go in to pick up cargo and move it, say you're on the 407, something happens, or the 401, I guess, if you're in Ontario, and you lose a little bit of the cargo, if you don't have the adequate coverage, right. As per the terms, it might be coming out of the company's pocket, which will detrimentally affect you. So I think insurance coverage is one of those hard ones that you meet. You have the right coverage for the right job, essentially. You're not overarmed.
I understand. I think the one that I would like to ask as a follow-up is, usually I've seen personally as A&I providing of services, when you go to different mines, different companies, they all have a standard requirements of insurance, let's say coverage, right? And they've got they basically have got something which is not different from service to service. It's basically a standard for all services, right? And usually when I go there, you're trying to, let's say the guy is trying to cover for people who are going to be actually doing under mine contract work, right? Like developing the mine, installing services and everything. We don't do that. So it's the same at that point, having the same coverage, or like, having the same risk covered as to somebody developing a mine. How do you push back on it? Because we don't, as Analyze Improve, we don't do actually mining itself, right? Yeah,
that's a good question. So you would bring that up when you're doing the contracting. At that point in time, you would challenge at the point there, and you would ask them to define the risk associated with because like I said during the thing, the risk doesn't go away; it just transfers between both parties. So I think if you want me to get this coverage, it is going to cost X dollars more. Are you okay with this X dollars, or do you believe that this coverage for the work that I'm doing is not relevant? At that point, it is a decision for the organization to make. If they say, go ahead, well, then the cost is transparent. Then you're being transparent with that.
Okay. Good. I don't see any other questions here. Let me see if somebody's still asking. Let's see. There's one more I wanted to ask, and I'm trying to remember now. So, yeah, when you are dealing with, like, you've been on the other side of actually managing the contracts and seeing, like, claims or which causes a lot of issues. What in your mind is the root cause for that? Is it like better that we didn't scope out the work better? Is that causes the biggest problem, or is it? You started with demand planning. Is the miss there, or where do you think is the biggest miss you've seen in your experience, which causes issues with the contract?
I think the largest miss that usually comes is the scope needs to be a little bit more robust with the job that you're trying to do. Now, I understand when you do underground work, oftentimes you don't know what's behind the job. So for us, if I was to look at that point, the scope needs to be robust, and understanding that there will be discovery work, the mechanism needs to be very clean with how to authorize that portion. The largest challenges that I've seen are the ones that aren't forecasted, and then the parties are trying to soft put their way around addressing the core problem. The core problem is that this wasn't forecasted. It costs more money. How would you like me to deal with this?
Okay. Understood. Yeah, I mean, I think those are good ones, because I've seen, like, not being one of the parties on the organization or on the supplier side, but being in the middle of it, because I'm trying to do some work and then it's related to the contractor saying, well, we didn't talk about this, right?
Yeah. So we have a comment here that says, can you comment on the role of the operations in contract management? Absolutely. The role of the operations is the customer in most cases, for the procurement officer or the contract management. You're there managing the contract so that they can get the service from the supplier. They're absolutely critical. They need to understand the contract, and they're often the party that gives you the scope of work as well. So how that fits in, how the rate, how the billing works, how the QA works, who does the checkoff, what expectations are on them. Like, if they're responsible to go down and check the supplier's work, how often are they going to do it, and who's exactly going to do it? So it goes back to the racing. You need to hold somebody accountable and make sure that it's happening. The routine management, the performance reviews, monthly, it happens on time. There's no like, oh, unfortunately, there's a meeting that came up. I can't attend. No. This was known. This is important. I need you to be here. Or you give me somebody who represents you that needs to be here. But we can't keep pushing this stuff off. So there is a bit of an accountability. It's a little bit of a dance, right? You don't want to be too offensive or too strict with them, but it's a little bit of a dance. But they're absolutely key in the success of what you just did.
That's good. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, there's one more here. Automation of contracts, increasing integration into the information system. Any observations or comments? So I think it's how do you use the information system technology or processes?
Yeah. So coming from resource backgrounds, what I guess the greatest level of automation we were doing was with the project tracking. So if we had a defined scope and we were going through the Gantt chart and what we expected, so I'm going to go pick on mining, right? So we had development of footage per day or meters per day, whatever the case was. We expected the supplier. We chose the supplier who had the most, I guess, sophisticated form of managing that contract, who would put in our development plan, our drawings, all of that within the software, and then we would manage that. We would get access to that software. So as a customer, I would be able to get an online link, sign in with a username and password, and then we would manage that online in terms of outstanding days for any invoices, where we failed. So there's a little bit of a lean aspect to it. Did we hit our footages for day 1 to 15? Oh, we had 2 down days. Why did we have 2 down days? And getting into the weeds of, is equipment availability a problem? Is manpower a problem? Is cage time a problem? How do we make sure that we keep on track with the plan through the life of the agreement, so that we're not talking about amendments and because we couldn't do enough. Not that we didn't have enough time, it's just we couldn't do enough at the time we had. And on the billing side, you have your rates put in, and you have when a rate is supposed to be built, right? So then it just goes into a very simple picking and choosing, how billing works, and then it's seamless to invoice payment, approving and then invoice payment. So I've seen that both. I don't know if that answers your question, Tim, but the automation, the greatest value I see is when you're actually managing the project with a supplier who is lean and thinking about how to manage it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and to be honest, like more and more we've been seeing now with the underground mines or mining itself, especially most of the other industries have kind of adopted the digitization piece earlier than mining. The mining is starting to get there now. It does become quite possible to do some of these things that you just talked about, right? It's just if I was able to monitor live development, the example you gave, and I knew things now need to stay on that critical path, I need to do all this extra stuff that could automatically kick off things that you need to do. If you needs to happen in a contract, if you need more resources, if more supplies, everything could be linked. And
it helps with having one truth, right? The largest issue with data with multiple people is my data is right and yours isn't. So you start getting the base of that conversation never seems to be aligned, right? Yeah. So when you automate it, you put it on a platform, everybody buys into it, how you input the data and what it spits out. The truth is established. Then you're talking about the same data points.
Yeah, and the comment Tim made about the application of penalties and premiums, yeah, for sure. I think that this is the one that I'm kind of not exactly this, Tim, but I'm trying to apply that concept in the milling with one of our clients. We're trying to build a optimization model where we see what are the key factors driving recoveries and throughput, and then based on where we want to optimize, we have things which actually automatically says we're going to live with these penalties and this we don't live with. Yeah. So yes, it's great that can also be same concept applied here.
Yeah, well, no, I understand, Tim. We've all blocked it. But Tim, to add to your point, the supplier, the contract that I'm speaking to, when we spoke to them, it was a very advanced discussion where it was a pain and gain contract. That profit margin was dependent on the footages that they were able to do. So they were very well invested. And we, when we looked at it when we did the project priority matrix, off the top we said, the cost of the contract is important. However, if you don't hit these footages, this is the revenue impact we're going to get, because we need this. We need this area available for mining at this year, because it continues with the mine plan. So when you change the conversation to cost, from past cost to revenue, in that certain specific case, it becomes a very powerful way of looking at this contract as a tool to get to that end result. Mind you, I'm not a proponent of saying you need to spend more money. That's something I'll never say. I'm a supply chain guy. It's not part of my DNA.
All right. Thanks, Jaffe. I don't think there's anything else there. So for the people who would like to continue having this conversation or have something more specific to talk, we still have that Google Meet session if you want to join. I'll drop the link back up here to refresh it. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining, and we'll continue having these sessions periodically.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.